Amen. Thank you so much. Michael, thank you for the shout out for Harper and Hudson. Now, you know what they say, every family thinks they have secrets until you ask kids for prayer requests, right? So Harper and Hudson have filled me in on some of your secrets. We'll talk about it later, right? Oh, wow. Thank you all. These are our people right here, right? Preschool and children, they are right down here, and I am your fan for sure. Thank you for being here. I want to talk today quickly about the changing landscape of Generation Alpha. And this is a topic that some of y'all are somewhat familiar with, but I hope I can give you some new information. But as I was thinking about this session, not to be outdone by Shane Pruitt, I have a picture of me. And there's a picture of my family that I grew up in as I was thinking about how childhood has changed. So if I were to ask you which one's me, what color dress am I wearing in this picture? Blue, yeah. And guess what? That was homemade. My mom made my dresses. Now, if I were to ask you what age I was, what would be your answer? What do you think? 6, 7. You got it. Yeah. All right. Woo. Okay. Now kids will never say that anymore because I just tried to be cool saying it. But yeah. I was about 6 or 7 years old. My dad had the Elvis Presley sideburns that you can't see. My mom had a beehive. Any of you guys have a beehive, Mom? You know, it's like a hairpiece they put on top of their head. Nobody did that? Yeah, that was an Oklahoma thing. Okay, so it was up in the closet. She'd take it out and put it on for special occasions. But that's a Olin Mills picture for a family directory. Yeah, we've got some of those. You remember those days, right? And you got to sit in line for about 2 hours before you got your picture made, right? Lots of threats, lots of bribes happened to get that picture. But my childhood is very different from the kids growing up today. And we want to kind of talk about that. And we're going to frame it really in 3 questions. When we think about Generation Alpha, who are they? What kind of a world are they growing up in? And then what do they need from us? So let's real quickly talk about who are they. We know that they were born from 2010 to 2024. That means they're about 1 to 15. So they're in our preschool, children's, and student ministry. We've got them in all ages in our groups. They are the children of Gen Z and millennials. And for the first time, we're seeing a decrease in birth rate. And for our betas that are coming behind us, they're going to worry more about population sustainability than overpopulation. But there's also at the same time an increase in life expectancy. They're going to live longer. And in all ways, you know this, they're very, very diverse. Diverse in thought, diverse in beliefs, diverse in race and ethnicity, in family structure types. They are a diverse generation. They are digitally dependent. They cannot imagine a world without Alexa or Siri or artificial intelligence eventually, right? They were 0 to 10 years old during the pandemic. And we know that we're still seeing some of the impacts of the pandemic on their lives developmentally. Their worldviews and their purchasing is shaped by algorithms. They're the first generation to really have that worldview shaped by the things that social media is constantly feeding them. And then they've grown up with a curated and filtered image. You know, my parents had to pay a lot of extra money to get the touch-ups on those photos, right? But our kids, they're constantly making themselves look a lot better than they really are. They are also expensive, right? In 1977, the cost of a child was just $53,000. In 2025, they say the cost is about $389,000 to raise them from birth to 18, right? The world was very different when I was growing up. Just for fun, I got a National Enquirer here from 1977. And this was the original clickbait, right? It was at the checkout stand when you would check out for your groceries, and it always had a bunch of gossip, right, and a bunch of half-truths. And so I thought it'd be interesting to read a few of these that are actually in this 1977 National Enquirer. So one that I found said that hospitals' new delivery service for medical specimens was carrier pigeons. Can you imagine carrier pigeons taking our hospital specimens to various labs? Another one was, that didn't age very well, Star Wars movie. Movie is a piece of nonsense. Boy, did that one not age well. Another one that's interesting, religious boom sweeps America. And it talks about, for the first time in 2 decades, religious attendance is on the upswing. A little bit similar to what we're experiencing right now, too. Or how about just the ever-present King Tut's tomb and vampires, right? There's always something in there about King Tut or vampires. There's always something in here about women and men losing weight. And then one that I thought was interesting, it said, judge offers prisoners, convicted prisoners, prison or church. So First Baptist Fresno, California had a program where a judge would say, you can go to prison or you can go be involved in this church, and they had a program. Very, very interesting. The last one that I think I was not expecting was an article about a transsexual athlete, a tennis star. I didn't know in 1977 that we were already dealing with some of those things. And so children and the childhood of our children has changed, but many of the struggles that we had then, we still have now. So what kind of a world then are they growing up in? You know some of these things up here. You've experienced it. You know that our world is very, very polarized, and the extremes are getting more and more extreme. It's a very us versus them world. You either agree with me or you're my enemy. And they're growing up watching grown people shout at each other in government. It's amazing the kinds of things that our kids are seeing. There's an absence of shared truth. There's very, very few things that we all agree on. And Tristan Harris, who was part of the social media dilemma, the social dilemma documentary, and he also has a company that really talks about AI. And he says that societies, civilizations have to have some shared truth in order for them to survive. And one of the interviewers asked him a question, what are you so worried about? What do you think the end game is if there's not shared truth in our world? Some of you saw that. Does anybody remember what he said? Civil war. He said that about 6 years ago. And we're seeing some of that sort of play out where Americans are fighting each other more than they're fighting people outside of America. And our kids are watching that. It's a hyper-individualized world. Some people might even say a toxic individualism, where it's all about me and very little about we. It's a move from from collectivism, where we think about what's good for the common good, to individualism, where we can only think of ourselves. It's also a clickbait attention economy. What people want is our kids' attention. And they will give them whatever that takes to keep them engaged or to have their attention. And our kids are constantly being pursued for that through their phones. It's an age of deep fakes and disinformation. People have technology now to create scenarios, to create videos, to create stories that look real, that you and I aren't even sure. Are they real or are they fake? Imagine growing up in a childhood where you don't know if the adults are telling you the truth. The World Economic Forum in 2023 said that the greatest threat to our world is disinformation. So disinformation is when people intentionally give you wrong information to get their desired result, and our kids are growing up in that. They're also growing up in a time when violence is ever present. I think I read in DFW area there were 10 murders this weekend. Our kids weren't designed, and you and I weren't designed to see so many violent images. And if you think about just in the past 3 or 4 weeks, maybe a month, the kinds of violent images that have shown up on our feeds. We saw a lady in a bus stabbed to death. We saw Charlie Kirk murdered. Just this weekend, they kept playing the video over and over again of the climber in Yosemite National Park who was doing a live stream, and he fell to his death. Legacy media used to kind of be a gatekeeper of those kinds of images, and they wouldn't show those things. But now, immediately, you go on to social media and you can get a steady diet of this. And what we know is that the more that we see violent images, the more we're desensitized. And that causes our empathy to decrease. And we have kids, and we have a world with very little empathy. And so our kids were not designed to see all of that. We also know that it's a very performance-driven world. The product is the goal. Process is sort of pushed away. And all we want is kids who perform. We also know that we're experiencing persecution for the first time, not for the first time, in increasing ways as Christians. And we have to prepare our kids for that. We know that they have identity confusion. That's not a new thing. It's sort of a developmental task that we have as teenagers. But for the first time in history, our teenagers go through that developmental task with the technology to actually change their identity if they decide to, right? And they're being affirmed in that. So there's lots of identity confusion. And then they live in a world where we are dehumanizing each other, right? Pornography dehumanized many and made people an object, and it's hurt the relationship ability of some of our young Gen Zers because they detach themselves away from humans. We see social media dehumanizing. We see the ultimate end goal of that is when somebody will go and shoot them because they don't agree with them. They no longer think of them as a human, but as an enemy. And so our kids are growing up in that world, and it's a difficult world to grow up in. One of the sort of classic books out there right now that most of you guys have at least heard of, most of you have probably read it, is The Anxious Generation. And one of the principles of this book is that we've traded a play-based childhood for a phone or technology-based childhood. And if you haven't read this book, Jonathan Haidt, who's an atheist, by the way, does a beautiful job of outlining what has happened when our kids quit becoming kids and had their phones as the most important thing in their life. One thing about this book, though, is that it is the one thing that all of us are sort of read into. I don't know that we can find anybody who would disagree that social media and technology in the hands of our kids has had a bad effect, right? We sort of collectively now all agree, and maybe it's the one thing right now that we agree on in our world, is that phones have harmed our kids. And what's cool is you're seeing not only this recognition that it's a collective problem, but you're seeing a collective solution. We're taking phones away from kids in school. We're trying to pull back that very thing, and it's taking all of us to agree on it to make that happen. And so that's an encouraging thing. Part of the content, just a small part, there's tons more content, comes from a book that'll come out in June that Shane Pruitt and I co-authored on Generation Alpha. And we did a survey, and many of you participated. We had about 715 people participate in this survey, and we asked them, what is the greatest influence, the greatest cultural influence on Gen Alpha? And social media and technology blew everything out of the water. There was complete agreement from parents, teachers, ministers, pastors, that social media and technology is harming our kids, followed by cultural agendas, and then the elevation of feelings over facts. Another part of that survey involved asking parents or asking participants, how aware do you think parents are about certain issues? And we had a long list. And the two issues that parents were the least aware about, that you all said, was artificial intelligence and inappropriate content that's being shared through social media. And so one of the emerging influences that we really don't even know or understand yet is going to impact our kids is artificial intelligence. Not only is it changing the way that they are producing work, it's also going to change their relationships. In the same way that social media didn't make our kids more social, artificial intelligence is not going to make our kids more intelligent. As a matter of fact, if you know education, you know Bloom's taxonomy, and you know the steps and the learning and the higher levels of learning, artificial intelligence basically squashes that, right? It allows kids to go with a question and go all the way to the highest level of learning to produce a product that looks like they've synthesized and evaluated it. And so we have to protect that process of learning for kids. And then this idea, this evolving idea that our kids are having relationships with virtual companions, virtual boyfriends, virtual girlfriends. It sounds way out there, but probably you're aware there have been at least two suicides from kids who got enmeshed with a virtual companion who led them to that point, right? And so once again, we have this gap where kids feel lonely, and then we have this technology where kids can find something to connect to, and you can see that it's a train wreck that's probably going to happen. And so kids could potentially detach from human relationships. And so we have some concern about that emerging influence. Think of it this way. For older generations, and I guess I put myself in that category, I'm a Gen Xer. Somebody's a Gen Xer over there. Our neighborhood, the communities, the church, the little geographic area that we sort of were in as children was our entire world, right? Everything was sort of controlled. Our parents could control who was in our life. Our parents could control the kind of content. They filtered it. But for Generation Alpha, it's completely different. The world, literally, is their neighborhood. And the world can reach to them through their phones, through social media and technology. So they're growing up seeing the world much more bigger, much more impactful than what I did. And the way that they do that is through their screens. There's a study, and they gave sort of an average of the amount of time that kids spent on screens. So I got my calculator out, and from the ages of 8 to 18, kids will spend 29,000 hours in front of a screen, with the world bombarding them with a secular worldview, bombarding them with options and temptations. And if you do the math and you're really generous and you say, well, what if kids went to church for 3 hours a week, 52 Sundays a year, from ages 8 to 18, just for fun, I picked those, they would have 1,716 hours at church. So you do the math, for every 1 hour that kids spend at church, they're getting 17 hours of content from a screen. That's hard to compete with, isn't it? And it also reminds us that those 1,716 hours have to be high quality, have to be worth their time and intentional. We also know that kids are fascinated by social media influencers. 64% of Gen Alpha would rather be a social media or YouTube influencer than the President of the United States. Isn't that crazy? 49% of them really look to social media influencers for product recommendations and even put that at equal footing with their friends and parents. So social media technology is impacting our kids. The other area that I said that parents didn't have as much awareness, or that you all identified really, was about pornography. In one study, it said that around 40% of 13 to 17-year-olds already report that it's normal to share nudes of pictures with each other. Jennifer mentioned that I'm LPC, so I have friends who are LPCs, and we talk about the things that kids are going through, and frequently they say parents just don't have any idea what kids are doing with inappropriate content. They've become, instead of just consumers of pornography, they've become content creators themselves because they have the technology to do that, and that's been normalized. The top reason that was given for consuming pornography, though, was to better understand their sexual preferences. So again, some normal curiosity in development of adolescence paired with technology is a recipe for disaster for our kids. And so they're sort of swimming in this world with all of these influences and all of these different kinds of worldviews. So the question might be then, what do they need from us? What do they need from us? I want to frame it around 3 ideas, and they're not earth-shattering. They're things that you know. They're things that speakers have already said this week, but maybe it's things we just need to continue to hear. 3 keys: relationship-focused, to meet that pain point of belonging that they have. Bible-saturated, to help them know what is true. The greatest gift that we can give our kids is for them to know what's truth. The Bible says, you shall know the truth, and what? It shall set you free. And then the last one, parents prioritized, to help have that influence that we need. So let's break those three down real quickly. First of all, relationship focused. You know that our kids are lonely. There's statistics I could share all day long about loneliness in kids, about even loneliness in parents. We are all have this longing to belong. And I wish that there was like an x-ray machine as kids walk through church, that if they felt a good sense of belonging, it would light up with green. And if they didn't have a good sense of belonging, it would light up with red, so that we could really identify those kids. Because sometimes we have no idea what they're feeling until it's too late, right? Kids, wherever kids feel like they belong is where they will be discipled. And if they feel like they belong more out in cyberspace with a radical group, that's where they're going to seek their belonging. Relationships, or the lack of relationships, will drive their behavior. It drives our behavior. And so the question that we have to ask is, are we creating environments in our churches where relationships are a central focus? See, belonging, I can't communicate belonging from a stage. I can hold up a sign that says you belong here when you walk in, and that's a good message. But true belonging happens in small groups with face-to-face interaction, with rituals, with relationships. And so as we think about wanting to grow bigger, we really have to think about smaller. We have to think about each individual child. Digital experiences don't create genuine belonging. And the reality is that most of us in this room, when we go to church, we feel like we belong. We've forgotten what it's like to not feel like we belong because we're the ministers, or we're the teachers, or we've been in the church for a long time. And so I think we really do have some blind spots in this area. I think there's more kids that don't feel like they belong than we realize. And so how do we help kids feel like they belong? I think with preschoolers and children, it's about those rituals that we do that are familiar, that helps them know this is my class, this is my teacher, this is what we do when we're together. Responsibilities, repetition, all of those things. I'm surprised that I do teach kindergarten, and a mom said last week, oh, so-and-so missed me in your class. She said, I didn't get to sing our song with Miss Shelly. We sing a song every week, and you'd probably think it's hokey, but that gives them comfort to know that every week we do certain things together. So younger kids can do that. Older kids, I think it's not just about helping them feel like they belong, but helping them find their purpose. Part of why we do what we do is because we've experienced the joy of using our spiritual gifts. We know when we're in our sweet spot, and we want to be a part of that. And so for older kids, I think it's helping them see where they fit in and how they can serve the church. Did a little bit of interviews with some college students at DBU, and I asked them to think about their student ministry. This is for you student ministers. I've got an ending with the children's ministers, but this is for student ministers. And you know these things, but I just want you to be reminded and listen to these 2 students and think about their experience of finding belonging.
Hi, I'm Avery, and I am a college student who is actively pursuing lifelong ministry.
My name is William, and I am also looking to go into ministry because of my time in the student ministry.
My time in student ministry from 6th to 12th grade was definitely the most formative years of my life. It is where not only did my faith become real, but it was tested, and I was formed into the Christian that I am today.
One of the greatest things about my student ministry is that I knew when I went that I was fully known. My student pastor not only would hang out with me on Sundays and check in on me, but he also came to all my sports games. I genuinely felt like I was friends with him. It wasn't only the student pastor who poured into me, but it was also adult leaders who took their time and poured and invested into me.
These leaders showed me what it was like to actively live out a life of faith. This wasn't their job or their profession or what they had a degree in, so it was raw and real for me to get to watch and see how they lived out a life of faith.
I felt like when I went to the student ministry that I could dive in and actually serve. It wasn't just a place where I went and got poured into, but it was also a place where I got to pour into other students. I felt like I had ownership.
If you were to ask me what some of my favorite student ministry memories were, it would honestly be getting to be a part of it and getting to help with it. I would say that my time in the student ministry is where my desire to pursue ministry came from, and it also is where I got to truly know God on a personal level and get to pursue Him in an intimate way and know that He created me, but also to know that we are on mission on this earth and that we are living for Him. And without my student ministry and with the things that they taught me, I never would have understood any of those things.
I remember there was a specific season growing up. I was confused, I was mad at God, and one of my small group leaders was there to guide me through that. I went to him and I was really struggling, and I laid it all out before him, and he was able to guide me and show me biblical truth, call me out on some things, sympathize with me, but also help me grow back in my relationship with God. And I never felt alone in the midst of that because I knew I could always go to him to talk about those things.
No one can deny that being a student these days is super difficult. We're always surrounded by people that are telling us things, different truths. Everything constantly feels unstable.
Social media is talking about the hard things every single day. We have our phones, and all the time is discipling us and telling us what to think about the world around us. Look, when the church is silent, the world is going to fill that void. It's going to tell you what to think about those things. And if the church doesn't combat that, then we are letting every single student get discipled by this world.
Hi, I'm Avery.
Whoops. We won't do that again. So lots of little sound bites that you could pick up on, the things that made them feel that sense of belonging. One more statistic, though, that I want to share with you. You know, Avery and William are the example that we want. That's what we want for kids. But Awana did a study, and they asked parents, why do they think their kids have left the faith? And if you look at the second statistic, 30% said that their kids never felt a sense of belonging in a church home. So belonging is such an important thing that is based upon that relationship-focused ministry. I know that it's difficult for us to have consistent volunteers, but consistent volunteers build relationships with kids that create belonging. So for all of you in here who are consistent volunteers, a shout out to you. Help us recruit more people to see the importance of relationship so that we can create that belonging. Second thing is we want it to be Bible saturated. There is a void of truth in our kids' lives and actually in the world. George Orwell says that the further a society drifts from truth, the more it will hate those who tell it. We see that play out in our world a lot right now, don't we? And George Barna did a lot of work with 13 to 18-year-olds, and I just picked the 13 to 14-year-old category, and I'm giving you some stats that really show we've got some work to do in the Bible-saturated type of ministry. 27% of these 13 to 14-year-olds identified God as the basis of all truth, as revealed in the Bible. 31% said they believe the Bible is the true and reliable words of God, and only 18% list the Bible as their primary source of moral guidance. And so their worldview is not based upon truth. And so in those 1,716 hours that we might have with them, we have to saturate it with Bible content and make sure that we're teaching them the capital T truth, that we're teaching them that is what we want them to look for. And to be honest, we haven't done a good job of that. I think if we're honest, as we think about who we're passing on from children's ministry to student ministry, there's a lot of gaps there in biblical literacy. And part of the solution is for all of us to work together, for all of us to run that leg of the race well. But For us, we've got to make sure that we are using the Bible every week with kids, that we are teaching them how we even use the Bible. More than kids need us just to share content, they need us to share our lives. They need us to share how we are using the Bible to make it through this very difficult, broken world. Another part of Bible saturation is telling the whole truth, right? Our kids need to know that suffering is normal. And our goal ought to be, as part of their theology when they graduate, that they have a theology of suffering, that they know what to do with those really hard things that tend to spiritually disorient them. Because a faith that lasts understands that suffering is just a normal part of being a human and a normal part of being a Christian. And we need to do a better job of preparing them for that. Gen Alpha also needs hope, and they need to know how to connect that to their suffering. You heard William say we need to talk about the hard things, or that his youth person talked about the hard things. We need to talk to them about what it's really like to love and serve the Lord, but still have hard things happen in our life, so that it's not a faith they grow out of, but a faith they grow into. So Bible saturation is a huge area that I think we could examine and do a better job, and it's something that they need. The last thing is that parents need to be prioritized. And as we think about that, we also need to just think about the differences in parents today. First of all, men and women are getting married much later and starting families much later. According to this particular statistic, the average age of men is 30, and the average age of women is 28. Now, if you think about our churches and how they're structured, we do a phenomenal job until we get them to college. We hope that at college they find the BSM or a church home. But what is there from that time they're in trade school or college until they get married at our churches? I don't know about y'all, but there's not a lot where I'm at. There's this big gap, and we lose them and we wonder why. It's because they don't have a place to fit. And so one of the strategies could be that I'm gonna sort of look at that gap and figure out how we can utilize that time to disciple those 20-somethings to be ready to parent, to be ready to be married, instead of just there being nothing for them. Another thing that is a reality is that women are giving birth at a later age. So our moms are older. From 1970, it was the age of 21, and then now we're at 27. Another statistic that I think is important to understand about families today, in 2019, this is according to the childstats.gov, so very legitimate site, 40% of all births were to unmarried women. Let that sink in. If we had 100 6-year-olds, is what they would be right now, 40 of those 100 did not start out in a traditional two-parent home. Now, some of them may have cohabitating parents, but at least they think at least between 28 and 30% there was no father involved. So as we think about ministry and as we think about parents, we have to think about the fact that we can't just cater to two-parent families. We've got to figure out how to build bridges for these moms who've chosen life. And we want them to be pro-life, but we also have to be pro-life for all of their life. Right? We've got to stand in the gaps and fill in those gaps where there's missing relationships. We also know that the families that come to our church are different. Only 50% of them have two biological parents. 31% single parents, 17% blended, and 2% other structures. Interesting statistic that only 7% of the world's children live in single-parent homes. So you're 4 times as likely to live, according to this data, in a single-parent home than you are in the United States than you are in anywhere else in the world. I really resonated with David Kinnaman last night when he was talking about his experience as a widowed father, and just how you hear things differently when you don't fit the mold. Some of you know I don't fit the mold either. I lost my husband when I was 35. And I can tell you that sometimes single parents feel invisible in church, and they don't feel like things are geared toward them. And sometimes all they need is for us to say from a stage or from a significant place, I see you. I see the struggle. We want to help you. We want to stand in the gaps. And those are the types of things that we have to do in order for parents to be ready to step into that role that we want them to fulfill. We also need to understand that beliefs drive behavior. And according to this particular study, this was Christian parents, when asked what were their goals for their kids, 31% talked about success. They wanted their kids to be successful. 30% talked about helping their kids know who they are and what happy life looks like. And then in this particular study of Christian parents, 14% had the goal of passing down their faith and values to their kids. And so one of the things we have to understand is our parents may not believe exactly what we think they believe about the importance of church, about the importance of passing down their family values and their faith. So it's possible that we have emphasized the role of parents, but not really prioritized it. Right? It's easy to talk from a stage and say, you're the primary disciplers of your kids. It's much harder to create ministries that say, we're here with you, we're going to walk with you, we know it's hard, we want to teach you, we want to even create opportunities for you to serve with your kids. And we have to realize that apparently just saying it from a stage hasn't worked. We've got to actually teach them, because many parents feel overwhelmed already. They're not just busy, right? They're overwhelmed. And they don't know how to do it. It wasn't done to them. Many of our young parents were not discipled themselves. So for us to continually expect them to disciple their children is probably not going to happen until we disciple them. So not only are we children's and student pastors and ministers, we also have to help parents, help them grow into that role, prioritizing them to grow into that role. Both single parents, married parents, grandparents, guardians, whoever it is, we've got to help them know what their role is and help them do it. Part of that survey that we did revealed some things. I pulled all the data of just parents. So if you filled it out and you're a parent and a youth minister, you went in this side. I only put parents in this side because I know that youth ministers and parents are gonna skew it. And so here's some of the things that we found in it. First of all, parents had greater concern about balancing work and family. That was one of their big concerns. So we need to know that as a pain point for them as we minister to them. You can see down at the bottom, though, that there was complete consensus, once again, that social media and technology was a big concern. And so when we know there's a pain point, that's an important place to step into and to begin trying to help parents. We know that every parent knows this is a hard thing, so how can we help them? But some of the areas where there was a difference in how they felt, or they didn't think the elevation of feelings over facts was as important. They didn't think inconsistent church attendance was as important, which that's an interesting thing, right? So overall, 36% thought that inconsistent church attendance was a barrier to reaching Gen Alpha, but only 15% of parents thought that was a barrier. Once again, we've got to work on those beliefs so that the behaviors change. Families have an impact, and we need to be reminded of just how important they are. In this particular study of 11 to 13-year-olds, parents were still identified as the primary influence in their kids' lives. And so parents need to be reminded that they have that. 84% of preteens go to their mom with questions about God. 41% go to their dads. But we also need to remember that when it comes to passing the baton of faith, a warm, close relationship with the Father is more closely tied to that than a close relationship with a mom. So if you think about all those kids who don't have a dad, and you think about that gap, and you think about the impact, we have some work to do. Relationship focus, Bible saturated, and parents prioritize. It may feel overwhelming. I threw a lot of stuff at you, but I would encourage you to ask yourself, which of these do we do well, and keep on doing those? Which of these might we need to tweak or to do better, and to pick one or two things to step towards, to work towards, to be able to reach Generation Alpha? Would you pray with me? God, I am thankful for these boys and girls in this video that remind us that even though the world changes, you don't, and your word doesn't. And so, God, we have a huge calling, each person in this room, to reach Generation Alpha. And Lord, we know that your word and you are good for all generations, Lord. So help us to keep remembering that you still do a good work. Lord, help us to know where to begin. Help us to know where to start. Help us to think about what we do and why we do it in such a way that we can maximize the time that we have with these kids. Lord, we love you. We thank you for the opportunity to be here, and may we be faithful to share your never-changing truth with the kids in this ever-changing world. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.